So you're starting that one game, maybe your first, maybe you have a few under your belt, and you always want to end up starting strong. So you want to end up coming up with some of the best storytelling you can come up with. You just whatever it was that was bubbling in your imagination, and you got this really long, intricate plot that's full of twists and turns, and is a bit of a roller coaster. The unfortunate truth about that, though, is that it typically is a roller coaster. It is on rails. What you're doing there is you're about to end up endeavoring to send the PCs on their way, and what they do with the material is what they do with the material. But at the end of the day, it's from point A to point B to point C to point D. This isn't always a bad thing, but I don't generally discourage it. Instead, one of the things I was actually taught by Andrew Wood, in fact, and I thought this was actually quite brilliant. I surprised I didn't end up running into this earlier. Maybe it's because I ended up running into a lot of bad games before I started running into some good ones. And trust me, you're going to find them, but keep digging. Eventually, you'll find the people that are really worth playing, and those gaming groups stick together for a while. But I digress. So, what Andrew ended up putting out a few years ago was the idea that you don't have a plot. Instead, you have multiple. And really, what you're doing there is you're just treating all your NPCs as though they have their own objectives. And you're just letting those objectives play out. This is what I garnered from them anyway. So from this point on, just assume that I'm misinterpreting something, and this is just what I got out of it. But because you've taken all these NPCs and you've made them start following their own objectives, what typically ends up happening is this situation where you build up encounters. Because unfortunately, not all these NPCs are going to end up having the same objective. They're not all on the same page. This NPC might be here scouting up for this one, might be the other way around. Who knows? Let me try and clarify. Say you have a king. Now, the king has hired the party, perhaps, or tried to tempt them with gold that they need to end up retrieving this relic. But he won't tell the players what the relic is. The reason is because this is a phylactery to a lich who is currently holding power over him, and he wants to get this little bit of material back so maybe he can blackmail the lich and turn the tables. This sounds relatively good, except it's the phylactery of a lich, and he's not really expecting the party to survive. He's expecting them to die, but anything to get that shot, what's a few lives worth? Well, what if the lich ends up catching on to this? Maybe they're not so eager to just turf the party, but instead end up making it very clear that the king has no interest in keeping them alive, just wanting to throw them around like dead meat, and offers, why don't you think for yourself for once? Not to say he's benevolent. At the end of the day, he's not going to tell them either. But maybe you have a third. This, who would be interesting? Maybe a senator or something. So these are just three political characters, but the senator knows what the phylactery is. Now, the senator wants to end up going in and retake his old position because senator, king, I guess advisor would be more appropriate. But you have these, just the use of senator, king, and having a lich involved, suddenly you have some history you're going to need to explain. Why is it it's a kingdom yet somebody's referred to as a senator? Maybe it's foreign, a bit of royalty. Maybe it's the king ended up turning it into a monarchy rather than a senate. Well, now you got some history to explain. And when you have a being that's thousands of years old involved in this, you have the basics for a very simple plot. But it also can run into multiple directions. Now, when this is being forced, maybe the characters, the players, start serving as spies for one another. They're starting to get the information, starting to get the whole picture, but don't give them the whole picture. Instead, let them start seeing the little details, those little hole punches that decide to end up showing out. What's a good example? Well, let's take that trio right now, which is just 3 NPCs we loosely fleshed out, and we're going to end up expounding a little bit on it. So who works for the king? Well, maybe his royal guard. So you usually have a captain of the guard. So let's just take him. Let's think about what this captain does. This captain watches the players. Now, depending on how they interact, he might be favorable or unfavorable. They might seem suspicious, especially when they start speaking to that advisor, the senator, that strange man in the robes who hasn't come anywhere near the king and yet starts speaking as though he's old royalty. A lot of questions, a lot of investigation. But what happens when the jester ends up finding out? I think it would be hilarious just to let the players in on it just because he wants the action to keep going because maybe he's a failed guard and was relegated to court jester. And he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder to play out for that. Okay, so we just expounded that off of 2 more characters built up. Okay, here's a small little bit of plot going on between the captain of the guard, the jester, and how they relate to the king. Well, we can probably play around with that a bit more. What about the lich? Well, we ended up discussing a phylactery. Well, why is the phylactery nowhere near him? Why hasn't he hidden it better, especially if he ever catches wind of it? Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe, in fact, it's lost. Now we end up having a little bit of a mystery going on. So where do you find it? Well, the king seems to think he knows where it is, but how the heck did the king find out? The more you start explaining and figuring out the details of all these little intricacies, the more you start realizing that pieces start falling into place. And this is one overarching plot line. But the players can come at it from whatever route they want. And what it turns into is that you have 5, 6, 7, 8 little plots that are all intricately woven in between different characters. You're not going to be able to pull all these off at the same time. I mean, like I said, these characters are running on their own timetable. They don't have time to waste on the player characters' indecision. So instead, what do? They continue on with their plans. They find somebody else. That somebody else might also be a plot hook, right? Because what about the opposing adventurers? What happens if there's a bunch of NPC adventurers who are, just willing to do any dirty job? Well, on occasion, they might have to end up doing something for the wrong person. The wrong person being whoever's up against the PCs at any given time, depending on how well the PCs wheel and deal. And their allegiances may stay, their allegiances may shift. It all depends on what they're interested for and how do you build up. Okay, so that's one plot. Well, what can be happening on at the same time? Well, what happens if there is what can we end up doing? Demonologist. And what does he do? He's locked in the bottom crypt. Again, we'll end up pulling from NPCs that we already know. Well, his job, as far as he's concerned, is to summon about a greater demon lord, bring him into this plane of existence. Well, okay, that's great. But how do we end up building this up? Well, he's a prisoner, but he's in the castle. Why is he in the castle? Well, obviously caught. Maybe he's getting ready to be executed. Maybe the king wants him to suffer a little longer, staying in the dungeons. But he's not going to let that detract him from his work. No, not a go-getter like that. So what do you end up doing? You end up taking the same person and you're just going to end up taking the idea of, well, he has to interact with somebody who ends up giving his food, maybe that individual is passing messages to and from his cell towards his cult, a small group of worshippers. But these small groups of worshippers are also involving themselves into the court, posing as chambermaids, guards, servants, anything that they can end up getting involved in, just to get a little bit closer to their master who's currently sitting in a cell and yet still wields power, all things despite. Well, what kind of havoc do these servants cause? Well, they're trying to get him out, or more importantly, smuggle him in the things he needs. The ritual must be performed. It must be performed at a very specific time and place, perhaps somewhere deep underground that was forgotten in time, but an old kingdom was built up, and time again it comes in to ruin those kingdoms that are built on this spot, but they're built up again and again, and this is just another time of that cycle repeating. So it is the signs that his demon deity is ready to rise again. Why? Because this castle, this kingdom, was built once again, and his cell sits just on top of the spot it needs to, as it always has and always will. Well, now we end up having something going. So we have a few plots involving smuggling, yeah, not only weapons, but contraband and other more nefarious bits. We have infiltration, where who's the spy? Who is it that's smuggling this in? Who are these people? We have a little bit of mystery going on, and this is entirely separate. It might involve one or two of the other NPCs we already described in this trio here plot between the senator, the lich, and the king, but now we all of a sudden have this underpinning of a prisoner who is very much still a cult of personality, and how he manages to weave into the guards. Now you all of a sudden can start fleshing out a few of his subjects and start figuring out, okay, where are they placed? Maybe just the chambermaid of the queen, who just lets her hear all the gossip that the king sets forward as he moans and whines about his daily routine. And, well, you can't help but overhear a few things in the sewing circle, can you? Eventually they make it to his ear, though, so he knows what's going on at any given time. When's the best time to get something in? When's a guard change? When are the best times to have a visitor? And which guards might actually be a cultist? Okay, so there's two major plots we end up having. Same city, or same kingdom. Doesn't even need to be a large kingdom. It could be just set in one city. Heck, we don't even need to leave the castle at this point. We have two major arc points. Third one. Okay, so we got one from the that's more supernatural in nature. We have one that's political in nature. Third one, we end up considering maybe the king's brothers and family. Well, they might want to see him removed from the picture. After all, when the king is dead, long live the king. Everybody's gunning for power, and your worst enemy will almost always, in such a circumstance, be Well, family. It's just an unfortunate health hazard of being king. Heavy is the brow that wears the crown. So, what do we end up doing with this? Well, let's think about this for a second. Mm. This is one of those nice little spice details you can end up tossing in. Maybe, maybe the queen has started getting whispers. Maybe she's not all there. Maybe she's losing her mind, but they gotta end up keeping up appearances. Or maybe she's not. Maybe she's hearing voices from the other side. Maybe she has this long standing blood curse. Oh, well, now we end up having something to work with, don't we? So take that same idea and just do what I did beforehand, right? Start fleshing out who, what, when, why, where, right? Just end up figuring it out. Now, figure out what they're going to do. Well, she's probably wanting to see a cure before this thing ruminates. Why? And you can start tying these together. They don't all have to be completely separate from each other, but they can be built. Simple example, the Queen's Madness is in fact a manifestation. That curse is in fact a manifestation, an omen to the cult leader who's in the prison that he is indeed exactly where he needs to be, that the end is coming, that there will be a rising of his master once again to walk this earth. And, well, sacrifices need to be made, but such sacrifices are gladly paid in the pursuit of power. What else is there, huh? The king, you think he's paying attention to it? No, he's too busy trying to end up figuring out how to get out from this Lich's thumb. Lich, on the other hand, might actually be a previous ruler. Maybe he does know. Maybe he died or made himself undead to survive the encounter that was sure to end up happening when the Demon Lord first arrived. Well, okay, there's a few tie-ins right there. Captain the Gorn. What about the Jester? Ooh, the Jester might actually be one of those spiteful cultists. Who knows? Maybe, in fact, he was the original cult leader. I don't know. There's so many little details. You don't need to end up making too many plots and twists, but if you got this relative framework and you know what are your major plots, who's trying to do what, and how are they going about it, you start realizing that there's all these little bits of leg room. And you could start taking just a little piece of it and giving it to the players. A little piece here, give it to the players. A little piece here, give it to the players. You don't need to start with anything big. Let's think of a simple example, right? Maybe the first thing that happens is that they are approached by the captain of the guard. Maybe some of them have a history with the guard of some kind or another. And he says to the party that he would like to end up getting a bit of evidence to end up continuing the prosecution. However, until he ends up receiving anything more of note, they can't behead this demon worshipping sadist that they have locked in. Now, if they can end up finding anything, he'd be sure to reward them handsomely and maybe be able to help them out in the future. And let's be honest, the party's going to do something that's eventually breaking the law, so they're going to want to end up having some leverage, some good paces. Okay, so right there's your first little plot hook. You might be involved in personal backgrounds, it might not. You might just need to end up doing the 500 gold. Maybe it's just that one of them needs to see justice done. That's a start. But when they end up coming into it, you have an entire cult currently ruminating through those last little bits of the old hangout where they used to perform and practice rituals. In fact, where the very spot where they took the arrest. Tell the story of the arrest through what the evidence shows. Don't tell them directly what happened, just let them figure it out for themselves. That right there is 2 or 3 sessions. And that hasn't even scratched the surface of this overarching plot we've discussed. And this is an example of just building up a plot, and this is stuff that just happened in one kingdom, just one city, in the middle of a vast kingdom. We haven't even expanded further than that. But right there, I can guarantee you, is about 6 months worth of game time. Some people feel the need to make huge, expansive worlds. They want the entire world populated. The problem with that is that no world, no matter how vast you try and make it, will ever be as good as the intricate details that you hear build up in just knowing the characters and knowing what they're about and starting from there. Well, if you enjoyed this rant, hit the like button, and up here subscribing if you want some more RPG here rants, and well, take a look at the channel. You might be surprised what you find. Take care of yourselves.